Ma'am, I'm talking to you. That pin under your collar. You want to tell me where you really got it? Because ladies didn't earn that one. So how about you take it off before somebody important walks through here and sees you playing dress-up? The voice carried across the lobby of the Veterans Medical Center the way a young man's voice carries when he wants it to, when he has an audience and a clean uniform and the unshakable confidence of someone who has never yet been wrong about anything that mattered. It bounced off the polished floor and the wall of donated unit plaques and came to rest on a small woman seated alone on a vinyl bench near the check-in desk. The morning light came in flat and gray through the tall front glass. The lobby smelled of burned coffee and floor wax and the faint antiseptic that lived in the walls of every such building in the country. Rows of folding chairs had been set out in the center of the floor, and at the far end, by the doors, a long memorial wall stood under a white drape, waiting for noon. Old men moved through the space in ones and twos, ball caps stitched with the names of ships and battalions and wars, canes tapping, walkers sliding. It was an ordinary morning at the end of a long line of them. The woman on the bench did not look up. She was 78 years old. She wore a plain blue cardigan buttoned to the throat, and a cane lay across her knees, untouched, the way a tool lies when its owner has not yet decided to need it. Her hair was white and neatly kept. Her hands were folded in her lap, one over the other, and there was something in the way they rested there that did not match the rest of the room. They were not the nervous hands of someone waiting for bad news. They were still in a way that took discipline. They were folded the way a person folds them when they have learned, somewhere a long time ago, that moving too soon got people killed. Under her collar, pinned slightly crooked, was a small device gone dark with age. The young sailor leaning over her was named Dalton Pierce, and he was 20. He wore the service dress of the United States Navy, white gloves tucked through his belt, here this morning as part of the color guard detail for the wall dedication. Beside him stood another sailor, younger still, a phone already half raised. Pierce had decided sometime in the last 2 minutes that the old woman was a problem he was uniquely equipped to solve, and the certainty of it sat on his face like sunlight. "I'm being polite about it," Pierce went on, pleased with himself. "I could make a thing of it. Impersonating a decorated veteran, that's no joke. So it's pinned where it belongs, son." The woman had raised her eyes at last. They were gray and level and entirely without fear, and they held him for a moment the way you hold a door for a stranger, courteously and without much interest. Then she looked back down at her hands. Pierce's grin slipped, just for half a second, before he caught it. Across the lobby, a man named Marvin Sokol looked up from the small podium where he spent his mornings as a patient advocate. He was 66, broad through the shoulders, gone soft now in the way that did not erase what a body had once been. He had spent 26 years in the Navy as a hospital corpsman, and he was looking at the old woman on the bench, and something in his chest had gone very quiet. He looked at the way she sat. He looked at the cane she was plainly not using. He looked at her hands. He did not look at the sailor at all. Pierce, finding his audience again, straightened and addressed the lobby at large. "It's a federal thing, actually," he announced to no one and everyone. "People think they can just buy this stuff, put it on, walk into a VA like they belong here." He gestured at the rows of reserved chairs. "Those are for honorees, ma'am, the real ones. So if you wouldn't mind." The old woman did not move. She watched him the way a person watches weather coming in off a ridgeline, without alarm, without illusion, simply marking its direction and its speed. Her hand stayed folded. Whatever was happening to her this morning had happened to her before, in louder rooms than this, and she had outlasted all of it. Sokol set his pen down on the podium. He had been handed a phone number that morning by a tired ensign, The advance element for the flag officer due at noon, a courtesy line in case anything came up. He had not expected to use it. He picked up the receiver, watched the old woman settle her hands again into that terrible stillness, and felt the certainty arrive whole and cold. He had seen those hands before. He had seen them in the mirror, younger, 50 years ago, learning to do the one thing those hands were built to do. He began, quietly, to dial. The young sailor leaned in a little closer, certain he was winning. He had no idea what he was standing in front of. Behind the desk, a nurse passing with a clipboard glanced at the small, dark pin under the old woman's collar, and her step faltered, and she did not say a word. But she straightened, the way you straighten without deciding to, and walked on a little slower than before. The line had not started yet. It only felt like it had. There was an old man at the check-in desk, and he was about to fall. He was a thin man on a walker, somewhere past 80, a faded cap on his head that said, Vietnam, and under it a face like a dropped map. He had been standing too long, and his arms had begun to shake on the walker's grips, and when he turned to find a chair, his weight went out from under him all at once, the way it does in the old, without drama, without time. He never hit the floor. The woman from the bench was there. No one in the lobby could have said how. The cane stayed on the bench behind her. She had crossed 8 feet of polished tile and gotten one hand under the old man's elbow and the flat of her other hand against the back of his head before his knees had finished buckling. She turned him as he came down, took the fall into her own braced legs, and lowered him the last few inches to sit hard, but safe on the cold tile. "I've got you," she said. Her voice had changed. It was lower now, and it carried in a way it had not carried before. Not loud, but built to be heard over noise that was not in the room. "Down slow. Bend the knees, not the back. There. You're all right. You came down easy." She had 2 fingers against the side of his throat before he could answer, reading his pulse without looking, her eyes instead on his color, on his lips, on the slackness in the left side of his face that was already coming back. "Lightheaded," she said, half to him and half to herself, in a flat, clinical cadence that did not belong in a hospital lobby in the year 2026. "Stood too long. Pressure's low, not a stroke. Get his feet up and he'll pink up in a minute." Marvin Sokol had crossed half the floor before he knew he was moving. Then he stopped. He knew that motion. He knew it in his hands and his hips and the old scar tissue of his knees. It was the way a Fleet Marine Force corpsman catches a falling body, the turn, the brace, the hand behind the head, as if every floor in the world were a place a man could bleed out on. You did not learn that in a classroom. You learned it in mud, on the 3rd or 4th time, when the body under your hand stopped being a stranger and became simply the next one. He had done it 10,000 times. He had not seen anyone else do it, exactly like that, in 30 years. He stood in the middle of the lobby with his mouth slightly open and watched a 78-year-old woman in a blue cardigan run a casualty assessment on a fainting man and call the result before the nurses had their gloves on. Pierce, for his part, was humiliated, and being humiliated made him cruel. Okay, he said loudly, stepping in, waving the old woman back with both hands as though shooing a bird. Ma'am, let the professionals handle it, all right? Back to your seat. We've got it. You're going to hurt yourself." He looked to his friend with the phone and rolled his eyes. Grandma's trying to play doctor. Jared Knuckles laughed and lifted the phone higher. The old woman did not argue. She waited until the staff had hands on the old man, until his feet were up on a folded coat and his color was coming back, and someone had a cup of water at his mouth. Then she stood, unhurried, and stepped back, and let them work. The whole thing had taken perhaps 40 seconds. She walked back to the bench. She picked up the cane she had not used. She sat, and her hands folded again, one over the other, and the stillness closed over her like water over a stone. Behind the desk, the nurse who had faltered earlier was watching her now and not pretending otherwise. At his podium, Sokol picked the receiver back up off the cradle, where he had dropped it without hanging up. He turned his back to the lobby and spoke low into it. "This is Sokol, patient advocate. Main lobby," he said. "I don't want to overstep, but you're going to want to come down here before the ceremony. There's a woman on a bench in my lobby, and unless I have lost my mind, your Admiral is going to want to know she's in the building." He paused, watching her hands. Tell him there's a corpsman down here. He'll understand the word." Pierce was not finished. Humiliation in front of a camera does not let a young man be finished. He drifted back toward the bench with his friend trailing, and now there was a thinness to his smile that had not been there before, the brightness of someone who has decided to win the next round to make up for losing the last. Knuckles held the phone out wide, framing the old woman and the rows of empty honoree chairs behind her. "All right. So, stolen valor. Live at the VA," Pierce narrated to the little glass eye, warming to it, playing the host. "We got a lady out here wearing hardware she did not earn, refusing to move out of the seats for actual veterans. This is what we're dealing with, folks." 2 or 3 people had drifted closer, the way people drift toward any small commotion, half curious and half ashamed of being curious. One of them laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound, and then looked at the floor. That was the thing about a performance like this. It did not need a real audience, only a captive one. Most of the people drifting closer did not believe a word of what the young sailor was saying. They could see the old woman plainly enough, the neat white hair, the buttoned cardigan, the cane she would not lean on, and some quiet animal part of them registered that she did not read like a liar at all. But disbelief is a private thing, and cruelty in a public room has a gravity that pulls people in and holds them there, ashamed and silent, each one waiting for someone braver to be the first to speak. No one was. That was how these things always worked. The boy had counted on it without knowing he was counting on anything. "You're in the honoree section," Pierce told the woman, pointing at the chairs as if she might not have understood the first 3 times. "Those are reserved. I need you to move to the back, the very back. There's seats by the door for—" He searched for it and found it cruel. "For visitors." "I'll stay where I am, thank you," the woman said. She did not look at the chairs. She had not, in fact, been sitting in the honoree section at all. She was on a public bench by the desk, and everyone who cared to look could see it. But the truth had stopped being the point some minutes ago. "See, that's the attitude," Pierce said to the camera. "That's the entitlement." "Sailor." Marvin Sokol had come up on Pierce's flank, quiet, his volunteer's polo shirt stretched across a chest that still remembered what it had been. "Walk it back. Right now. While it costs you nothing." Pierce turned and took in the polo shirt, the volunteer's lanyard, the soft, retired bulk of the man, and dismissed all of it in a single downward glance. "Sir, this is an official detail matter," he said, with the particular contempt the young reserve for the old, who are no longer in the chain. "I'm going to ask you to stand clear and let me do my job. Appreciate it." Sokol did not move, but something passed over his face. Not anger, but a kind of grief, the look of a man watching someone walk cheerfully toward an edge he cannot see. Through it all, the old woman's hand stayed folded. She watched the boy perform, and there was no heat in her at all, only that long patience, the patience of someone who has carried things heavier than an insult across ground, worse than this. The lobby light moved on the dark little pin at her collar. She had been mocked by louder men in worse places, with the stakes higher than a stranger's opinion. She had learned the cost of answering too soon. So she sat and she waited, and she let the morning come. If you have ever watched the young forget what the old once paid for them, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. Pierce reached toward her collar, then thought better of it, his hand stopping a few inches short. Not yet. But the thought had been there, and everyone had seen it, and the air in the lobby had changed. What came next, he decided, would be official. That was how he would win it. "All right, ma'am, I'm going to level with you," Pierce said, and he crouched now, bringing himself down to her eye level in a way he plainly believed was magnanimous. "Wearing decorations you didn't earn, that's not a gray area. That's a federal offense, the stolen valor side of it, I mean. And I'm on an official Navy detail this morning, which means I'm kind of obligated to address it. You understand?" He was inventing the authority as he went, the way frightened people do, building a structure of official-sounding words to stand on. None of it was true, but it was loud, and it was confident, and in a room full of people looking away, it was enough. "So here's what's going to happen," he continued. "I'm going to need to see some identification, and I'm going to need you to remove the pin. We can do this easy." The woman reached, without hurry, for the canvas bag at her side, and Dalton Pierce, to keep her from rising, set the toe of his polished shoe against the shaft of her cane where it leaned against the bench, pinning it to the floor so she could not use it to stand. It was a small thing. It was the smallest thing. But a number of people saw it, and something in the room flinched. The woman did not. She did not look at the boot. She did not look at the cane. She found her wallet in the bag, drew it out, and her face registered the trapped cane no more than it would have registered the weather on a window. That absence of reaction was its own kind of statement, and it landed harder than any protest could have. A flicker of unease crossed Pierce's face, there and gone. Somewhere to the left, a younger veteran, 40-odd, a desert cap on his head, took half a step forward and opened his mouth. Pierce's friend swung the phone toward him, and the man met the lens and lost his nerve, and stepped back, and hated himself for it. The staff at the desk were busy with the old man on the floor, or told themselves they were. The lobby found 100 reasons not to look directly at the bench. It is a particular kind of failure, the failure of a room. Each person in it was decent enough alone. The nurse would have stopped a stranger from being robbed on the street. The 40-year-old in the desert cap had pulled men out of burning vehicles and had the scars to show for it. The two clerks at the desk visited their own grandmothers on Sundays. But decency is not the same as courage, and courage is not the same as the small, specific bravery of being the first one in a crowd to say that something is wrong. That bravery is rare, and it was in short supply in the lobby that morning, and the old woman on the bench had spent a lifetime in places where it was the only currency that meant anything. She did not hold it against them. She had simply learned, long ago, not to wait for it. The old woman looked at Dalton Pierce. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, completely. She saw the white gloves crushed in his belt and the smear of nervous sweat at his hairline. She saw the nails bitten down past the quick on the hand, braced against his knee. She saw the small tremor in that hand that he did not know was there, the tightness around the eyes, the loudness that was covering something thin and scared and very young. She had spent a lifetime reading bodies for what they were hiding. This one was not hiding much. "You can put the boot down, son," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." It was not a threat. There was nothing in it but a strange, level kindness, and that was somehow worse, and Pierce felt it land and did not understand why his face had gone hot. "Stop deflecting," he said, too fast. He stood up out of the crouch, needing the height back. He turned to the gathering knot of onlookers, to the phone, to his friend. "You all see this? I'm trying to handle this professionally, and she's..." Okay. Okay. You know what? I'm going to settle this right now. By the front doors, Marvin Sokol had the phone pressed hard to his ear, his eyes never leaving the bench. He's reaching for it now, Sokol said into the receiver, his voice gone flat and urgent, the voice of a man calling a position under fire. Whoever's coming, you need to walk faster. He's going to put his hands on a Navy cross in front of 40 people, and none of us are ever going to forget it. Marvin Sokol hung up the phone and did not go back to his podium. He walked into the open floor of the lobby and put himself between the young sailor and the old woman on the bench, and he did it the way a body does a thing it has done before, squaring up without theater, planting his feet on the polished tile as though it were ground worth holding. "Son," he said, "look at me. Not at the camera. At me." Pierce looked at him, annoyed. "I spent 26 years in this Navy as a hospital corps man," Sokol said. His voice was low and even, and it did not perform for anyone. "Fleet Marine Force. I went where the Marines went. And I am telling you something now as a gift, because in about 2 minutes nobody is going to be in a mood to give you gifts." He nodded once, slightly, toward the woman behind him without taking his eyes off Pierce. "I know how a corpsman sits. I have sat like that, in rooms worse than this, waiting. I know how a corpsman catches a falling man. You saw her do it. You all saw her do it. And not one of you understood what you were looking at. That was not a lucky grab. That was 40 years of muscle doing what it was trained to do. Okay, old-timer. You are about to do something," Sokol said, riding over him, quiet and relentless, "that you will spend the rest of your career trying to live down. And you have got about 90 seconds left to not do it." For one moment, something moved behind the young sailor's eyes. Doubt, maybe. The first cold draft of it. Then he laughed. It was the laugh of a young man in front of a camera who has decided that backing down would be the only real failure. He looked Sokol up and down again. The polo, the lanyard, the soft retired shoulders. And he chose, the way the young so often choose, to mistake gentleness for weakness and age for surrender. "With respect," Pierce said, not meaning any, "you're a volunteer in a golf shirt. You're not in my chain. Stand down, sir, before you make this your problem too." Sokol did not stand down, but he turned his head, slowly, and he looked for the first time directly at the small, dark device pinned crooked under the old woman's collar, and the blood went out of his face. He had seen it from across the room and not let himself believe it. Up close, there was no mistaking the shape of it, the particular ribbon, the weight of the thing it stood for. It was not something a person bought. It was not something a person found. There were a vanishing number of them in the world, and everyone had been paid for in a currency this lobby could not imagine. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had gone rough. "Forgive me. I should have come over sooner." The old woman lifted her eyes to him, and for the first time that morning, something in her face opened, just slightly, the recognition of one of her own. She had spent 50 years being invisible to everyone but the people who knew where to look. And here, in a fluorescent lobby, was someone who knew exactly where to look. "You were a corpsman," she said. It was not a question. 26 years, Master Chief, Sokol said, and he did not know her rank, could not have known it, except that the word came up out of him from some place older than knowing, and it was correct. And they both heard that it was correct. "Wherever the Marines would have me." "Then you already know," she said gently, "that there's no need to apologize for taking your time. You came when it counted. That's the whole job." Sokol's jaw worked. He had carried that exact sentence in his own chest for the better part of 30 years, and had never once heard another living soul say it back to him. You came when it counted. It was the thing he told himself on the bad nights, the nights when the names came back, and it had always sounded thin in his own head, like an excuse. Hearing it from her, it did not sound thin at all. It sounded like the truth a person earned only by paying full price for it. "Yes, Master Chief," he said quietly, and the rank came easier the second time, because now he was sure of it, the way you were sure of the floor under your feet. He squared himself a half step more solidly between her and the young sailor, and he did not move again, because there was nothing on earth that was getting past him to that bench now. Through the tall front glass, a dark sedan slid to the curb. The doors opened. Men in service dress stepped out into the gray morning light and began to move toward the building with the unhurried speed of people who are never, ever late, because the world arranges itself to wait for them. Pierce, his back to the glass, saw none of it. He saw only that he had somehow become the smallest person in a conversation he had started to dominate, and the old, raw need to fix that rose in him one final time. What the boy in the white gloves did not know is what the next 4 minutes were about to teach him in front of every single person he had been trying to impress. Subscribe so you do not miss it. The lobby fell away. In its place was the autumn of 1968, and the heat, and the green going on forever, and the open ground. A Marine rifle company was crossing a stretch of flooded paddy in the early afternoon, strung out along a raised earthen dike, because the dike was the only thing above the water. And that was the trap. And they walked into it the way good men walk into traps, doing everything right and dying anyway. The tree line on the far side opened up all at once. 2 machine guns, maybe 3, set to cross their fire over the open ground, so that there was no direction to run that did not run into bullets. Men went down on the dike. Men went down in the water. And from somewhere in the middle of it, a voice went up. The oldest 2 words in that war. The words that meant someone's whole world had just narrowed to a single point of pain. "Corpsman! Corpsman up!" She was 20 years old. She went out the first time before the cry had finished, off the back of the dike and along its flooded face, where the dirt gave a hand's width of cover, crawling with her aid bag dragging in the brown water. And she reached the first man where he lay half in and half out of the paddy, with his leg opened up, and she got a tourniquet high on the thigh and twisted it down hard, while the rounds walked the top of the dike a foot above her head and threw dirt in her teeth. She got her hands in his drag strap and she hauled, backward, both heels driving into the mud, and she pulled a 190-pound Marine 11 feet through the water to the low place where the others could reach him. Then she went out again. The numbers did not matter to her then, and they would not matter to her later. But other men counted them, and the Citation would count them too. The dike was 60 meters of open ground. The guns never stopped. She crossed it the second time and the third, and each time she came back dragging a man by his straps, and the second time something hit her along the ribs and she kept her feet, and the third time something took a piece out of her left calf and she went down and got up and kept pulling, because the man in her hands was still alive, and that was the only fact in the world that counted. The 4th man was at the far end of the dike, alone, and he was 19, and his name was Tommy Braddock. She reached him with her own blood filling her boot. He had been hit through the belly, and she knew what that meant the moment her hands found it, knew it with the cold certainty that the very good and the very experienced carry like a stone. But knowing it changed nothing about what her hands did. She packed the wound, and she held pressure, and she put her body between him and the tree line, and she talked to him the whole time, low and steady. The voice she used, the voice that told a dying boy he was not alone. He got one hand up and closed it around her wrist. His grip was already going soft. "Doc," he said. "Doc, don't you leave." "I'm right here," she told him. "I'm not leaving. You hear me, Tommy?" I have got you, and I am not leaving." She did not leave. She stayed in the open with him, holding his hand and his wound, until there was no longer any reason to, and the tree line kept firing, and the afternoon went on being beautiful and green above them, the way it had no right to be. She would not remember, afterward, deciding to stay. There had been no decision in it. A corpsman did not weigh a dying man against the odds of the open ground. The math simply did not run that way in her, had been trained and burned out of her, until what was left was only the next set of hands that needed her own. It was not courage, the way the Citation would later call it. Courage. It was something simpler and harder than courage. It was that she could not make her body leave a wounded boy alone in the mud, and so it never occurred to her to try. The bravest thing about her, the thing the medal could never quite name, was that she had never once thought of herself as brave. She had only ever thought of the next man. When they finally fought the guns to silence and the medevac came in low over the paddies, they tried to put her on it. She was hit in 3 places and gray with blood loss, and she would not go. There were still casualties on the field. She worked the rest of them, one after another, on her knees in the mud with her own wounds bound in field dressings, and she got on the last bird only when the last living man was already on it, and not 1 second before. They wrote it up for the Navy Cross, the corpsman who crossed the open dike 4 times, the woman the company would only ever call Doc. The lobby came back, the gray light, the waxed floor, the rows of empty chairs, and the same hands, 58 years older, rested folded over the cane. The same hands. They had held a 19-year-old's gut closed in the open under fire, and they had grown old, and they had not forgotten how to be still. 58 years later, the hands had not forgotten. Neither had the Navy. Dalton Pierce reached for the pin. He did it because Sokol had cornered him, and the old woman had unsettled him, and the camera was still running, and a young man who has decided he cannot lose will reach for the nearest thing he can take. He told himself, even as he did it, that he was being reasonable. He would simply remove the unearned hardware and walk it to the front desk, and that would settle the question, and he would be the one who had handled it. He leaned in over the bench, and his gloved pale fingers closed on the small, dark device at her collar. Her right hand came up. It came up faster than a 78-year-old hand has any right to move, and it closed around his wrist, and it stopped. There was no violence in it. She did not twist, did not wrench, did not pull him off balance. Her hand simply closed, once, with a strength that came up out of the floor, and the years, and the memory of drag straps and dead weight, and 60 meters of open ground. The grip of someone who had dragged grown men out of a river of fire by main force. And Pierce's hand stopped as though it had been set in concrete. He pulled against it on reflex. Nothing happened. His wrist did not move a quarter of an inch. For 1 second, the two of them were locked there, the old woman seated and perfectly composed, the young sailor leaning over her with his whole arm straining and his face beginning to register that something was very wrong with his understanding of the morning. Then she let go. She released his wrist as deliberately as she had taken it, and set her hand back in her lap and folded it again with the other. "Don't," she said. 1 word. It was not loud. It was the quietest thing said in that lobby all morning, and it stopped him more completely than a shout. Pierce straightened, cradling his wrist against his chest, though it was unhurt, staring at her. Behind him, Jared Nuckells had lowered the phone an inch without realizing it. The little crowd had gone quiet, and the quality of the quiet had changed. The laughter was gone out of it. People were beginning to suspect, in the slow way a room suspects, that they had badly misjudged what they were watching, and that they were on the wrong side of it. "Last chance, sailor," Sokol said very low. Step back, pick up your cover and stand at parade rest, and pray the next person through that door is in a forgiving mood. Step back. Pierce did not step back. He was past the place where stepping back was possible for him. Humiliation had closed that door behind him, one bad decision at a time. He drew breath to say something, to reclaim the floor, to make it official again. The front doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. A voice came across the lobby. It was not loud either. It did not need to be. It was flat and clear and shaped by 35 years of command, the kind of voice that arrives in a room already certain it will be obeyed, and it cut through everything else as cleanly as a blade through water. Seaman, step away from the Master Chief. Every head in the lobby turned toward the doors. The man who had spoken stood just inside them, and the gray morning light came in behind him and lit the gold on his sleeves and the rows of ribbons on his chest. And even the people in that room, who had never worn a uniform, understood at once, in their spines, that someone of consequence had arrived. He wore the service dress of the United States Navy. On his shoulder boards were 3 silver stars. Vice Admiral Gregory Thorne had come to the medical center that morning to dedicate a memorial wall at noon. He was perhaps 58, lean and weathered, and he crossed the lobby now without hurry, while his aides held back near the doors, and he did not look at the young sailor again. He had eyes only for the small woman on the vinyl bench. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the dark device pinned crooked under her collar, and then he looked at her face, and the certainty went out of his bearing, and something else came into it, something careful and almost afraid. "Master Chief Westbrook," he said. The name moved through the lobby. A few of the old men in the unit caps had already gotten to their feet without being told to, the way old soldiers do when the air in a room changes, and they stood now uncertain of what they were standing for, only certain that they should be standing. "Sir," she said, and inclined her head. She did not rise. She had earned, somewhere, the right not to have to. Thorne turned to the aide who had followed him a pace behind, and held out his hand, and the aide put a folded card into it, the citation the Vice Admiral had been going to read at noon in front of the draped wall, to a seated and orderly crowd. Thorne looked at the card, and then he looked at Dalton Pierce, who had gone the color of paper, and he made a decision. "Since it seems there's some question this morning," the Vice Admiral said, his voice carrying now to every corner of the lobby, "about what this woman did or did not earn, we'll settle it here. Now, out loud." He unfolded the card. Citation: "The Navy Cross is presented to Hospital Corpsman Lorraine A. Westbrook, United States Navy, for extraordinary heroism while serving as a corpsman with a Marine Rifle Company in the Republic of Vietnam in the autumn of 1968. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the desk phone seemed to have stopped. "When her company was caught in the open on an exposed dike and pinned by intense, interlocking automatic weapons fire," Thorne read. "Petty Officer Westbrook, with complete disregard for her own safety, crossed 60 meters of fire-swept open ground on 4 separate occasions to reach and recover wounded Marines. Though wounded 3 times and suffering severe blood loss, she repeatedly refused evacuation, administered life-saving aid under continuous fire, and personally carried or dragged multiple casualties to positions of cover." Dalton Pierce's face had begun to move. The audience he had wanted was finally, fully his, and he could not bear a second of it. Confusion first, the open, blank confusion of a man whose model of the world has just failed. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. No, this could not be the same person. Then recognition, terrible and total, as the pieces came together at last. The hands, the stillness, the catch, the grip, the word. Then horror, plain and undisguised, flooding up his throat into his face as he understood, fully and forever, exactly what he had done, and to whom he had done it. His gloves hung slack at his sides. He did not move. She remained on the field, the Vice Admiral read, his voice steady, until the last casualty had been evacuated. Among those she reached was Lance Corporal Thomas Braddock. His voice caught, just for a moment. He was a Vice Admiral of the United States Navy, and his voice caught on the name, and he let it, and did not pretend it had not. Lance Corporal Thomas Braddock, whom she stayed beside, in the open, under fire, until the end. All across the lobby, the old men were on their feet now, and the not so old, and the staff behind the desk, and the nurse with the clipboard, and the 40-year-old in the desert cap who had lost his nerve and now found it. The rows of folding chairs sat empty because every person who could stand was standing. No one had told them to. Some of them were weeping and did not bother to hide it. Vice Admiral Thorne folded the card along its old creases. He set his heels together. And then the senior man in the room, the 3-star, drew himself to attention before the woman on the bench and brought his hand up in a slow, exact salute and held it. Marvin Sokol was already at attention, had been for a full minute, the tears running freely down a face that did not move at all. The old woman looked at the Vice Admiral's salute. Then she put one hand flat on the bench, and she stood, slowly, deliberately, and entirely without the cane, which stayed where it lay. She came up straight. She came up the way a flagpole stands, and she returned the salute, her old hand steady as stone at her brow. She did not need the cane to stand for that. For a long moment the Vice Admiral and the corpsman held the salute between them, across 58 years, and the whole lobby stood witness, and Dalton Pierce stood frozen at the edge of it, with nowhere in the world to put his eyes. Then it was over, and the hands came down, and the mourning had to go on. It went on quickly for Dalton Pierce. His chief had come in behind the Vice Admiral's party, drawn by the gathering and the silence, and he had seen enough of the end of it to understand the shape of the whole. He crossed to Pierce now, and he did not raise his voice, because the worst dressings down are not raised, and he relieved the young sailor of the detail in front of everyone, in a few short, quiet sentences that took the white gloves out of his belt and the mourning out from under his feet. Pierce did not argue. There was nothing left in him to argue with. He stood with his cover in his hands and his head down while his chief spoke, and when it was done, he did not move, because he had not been told yet where to go, and for the first time all morning he was waiting on someone else to tell him. Vice Admiral Thorne watched it, and then he turned to the woman beside him. "Master Chief," he said, "you'll tell me what you want done about this. Any of it. All of it. You have only to say." She did not answer right away. She looked at Dalton Pierce, really looked. The long, complete look she gave everything. The corpsman's red. She saw past the disgrace to the thing under it. A frightened young man, far from anything he understood, who had reached for cruelty because it was the only tool in the room that made him feel large, and who would carry the next 10 minutes for the rest of his life, whether anyone punished him further or not. She had spent a lifetime keeping young men alive. She found she had no appetite for ending one now, even a foolish one, even this one. "He's a young sailor," she said. "He's going to remember this morning until the day he dies. That's punishment enough for what it was. Don't end him for it, Admiral. Let him learn it standing up." Thorne looked at her for a moment, and then he nodded. Once, and something in the set of his shoulders said that the request would be honored, that there would be a record and a reckoning, but not a ruin. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the veteran vault, and let this old corpsman's story find the people who need it. At noon, the white drape came off the memorial wall. The folding chairs filled, and the Vice Admiral spoke, and the names of the dead of that county were read out into the gray light. and the morning's small ugliness was folded away inside something much larger and much older. Lorraine Westbrook sat in the front row this time, where she belonged, with Marvin Sokol beside her, two old corpsmen side by side, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. Once, during the reading of the names, Sokol leaned a few inches toward her without turning his head. "There were a lot of mornings," he said under his breath. "I wasn't sure any of it counted for anything. Sitting at that little podium, handing out parking validations and pointing people at the pharmacy." He stopped. "Today counts." "Every morning counted," she told him quietly, her eyes on the wall. "You just couldn't always see it from where you were sitting. That's the part nobody warns you about. You do the work, and most of the time the work doesn't look like anything at all. And then once in a great while a door opens, and you find out it mattered the whole time." She patted his forearm once, the way a corpsman checks a man is still there. "It mattered the whole time, Senior Chief." Afterward, when the chairs had emptied and the lobby had gone quiet again, she walked to the wall. She did not use the cane, she carried it. She moved along the rows of newly carved names, with her reading glasses low on her nose, until she found the one she had come a long way to find. And she stopped. Thomas Braddock. She raised her hand and laid the palm of it flat against the carved letters, the way she had laid that same hand against a 19-year-old's belly in the mud half a century before. And she stood there with her head bowed and her hand on his name. And for once, she let the stillness be grief and nothing else. A few feet behind her, Dalton Pierce stood with his cover in his hands. He had not been ordered to be there. He had asked, quietly, through his chief, for the chance, and it had been granted. And he had come and stood a respectful pace back and waited without any idea of what he was waiting for. He watched the old woman's hand on the dead Marine's name, and he did not say he was sorry, because some part of him had finally understood that this was not a moment that had any room in it for him. The old woman spoke without turning around. "You want to know the only thing worth all of this, sailor," she said. Her hand stayed flat on the carved name. "It isn't the medal. It was never the medal. It's the names. You learn the names, and you stand for them, and you keep standing for them long after everybody else has gone home and forgotten there was ever anything to stand for." She traced one carved letter with her fingertip. "His name is Braddock. You remember that one. You carry that one out of here, and you'll have gotten the only thing out of this morning that was ever worth getting." "Yes, Master Chief," Pierce said. His voice was not much more than a breath. She nodded, once, her hand still on the wall, and she let him stand there with her a while in the quiet, which was the closest thing to forgiveness the morning had to offer, and which was, from her, a great deal. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.